Hello. Well, it's the end of March, and I guess, as is the done thing on BookTube, it's time to talk about the books that I've read over the past month. I read 8 books this month. I was on vacation for a lot of the month, so I probably got more read than I might otherwise have done. I know some people are real fast readers. I'd say, middle speed, pretty fast depending on the book. And some of the books this month went faster than others. The month's first book was Mox, which is a shadow novel published by Pyramid, number 6 in the Pyramid series. I believe there was 23 or 24 that they produced, maybe a few more. This is actually the 42nd pulp novel for the shadow. It's of course, Pyramid didn't reproduce all of them. There were almost 300, I think, high 200 and something. Anyway, this is a fun novel. It's got a cool picture of the shadow here on the back. And this one, Mox is the arch villain in this particular story. And I was surprised at how good this was. In the past, when I read some shadow novels that had made it into paperback form, sometimes the shadow himself didn't appear that much in the books. Mostly his agents taking center stage. The shadow is a mysterious figure working behind the scenes quite a lot of the time. He has a lot of agents working for him, gathering intel, and then he steps in sometimes at the very end of the book to take out the bad guys with his pistols, his twin pistols, twin 45s. But he was front and center in this novel, which made it a lot of fun. A couple of great action scenes. There's one in the middle of the book, big shootout in Mox's lair, but Mox escapes, of course, and then the shadow has to track him down later. If you're familiar with the shadow, most villains do not ever escape his clutches when he finally gets a hold of them. The fun thing in this one was that it was kind of a surprise who the bad guy was when he was finally unmasked. There was a fairly decent mystery there, and I was a little fooled by who was the actual culprit. So that was a nice surprise. And this was a fun, fast read, pretty well written considering Maxwell Grant. I think he was still writing these chiefly himself at this stage, although I'm sure there was some ghost writers scattered throughout. But the prose was pretty high level for this kind of pulp novel, especially when they were knocking 2 of these out a month back in the early days of the Shadow Pulp magazine. So this was a good read. I enjoyed this one quite a bit, and I wish I could get a hold of, and I'd like to get a hold of, more of these nice, cool Pyramid editions. And now, let's see. The second one I read was The Rings of Tantalus. This is book number 2 in a 4-book series by Richard Avery. This is the Expendables series. Now, Richard Avery was a pen name for the SF writer Edmund Cooper. Now, I guess I'm rather ashamed to say I haven't read any of the serious, real science fiction books by Edmund Cooper. But I have read this series several times over my life and always enjoyed it. Now, the Expendables are a group of expendables, as you might imagine. Basically, the earth is overpopulated, crime-ridden, starvation and political unrest is rampant, and so the United Nations comes up with a plan to try to colonize other Earth-like habitable planets, but they have to prove them first. So they send out probes and find planets that might be a good match, but then who knows what actual life forms are on there, if they're inimical to human life, what dangers or poisons, etc. are there, poisonous plants and savage predators, etc. So the Expendables team is sent through cryosleep. Usually takes a year or so to get to their the chosen planet, and each of these 4 books focuses on a planet. And this one the planet is Tantalus, and the crew there's 3 main members that features in every one of these books. Commander James Conrad, who is the gruff, tough British leader. He's a veteran spaceman who has a lot of experience in space, more than his other team members. Then there's his second in command, Indira Smith, who is a ship surgeon and as well as second officer. Kurt Quango, and I believe Nigerian American, who's like a lot of the rest of the Expendables, a criminal who was given a chance to redeem himself and clear his record by joining the Expendables team. Kurt's a real genius, the kind of thinker and one of the scientific, kind of Now Kurt Quango is a scientific genius and a key member of the crew. He and Conrad have a really fun relationship. A little bit of politically incorrect banter back and forth between them, but they're actually close friends and would, easily sacrifice their life for each other. Now, in addition to those 3 crew members, there's always another 4 in each book. 4 new recruits, again, all with, in the beginning of the book, always gives a interesting data file on their transgressions and their criminal records. Again, living true to the name. Many of them will not, or several of them, usually each book may not make it to the end with various things going wrong. There's always dangers that they encounter. Now, the first book is The Death Worms of Kratos. This one is extremely fun and well written, even for what it is, kind of a exploitative pulp 70s sci-fi novel. And this, of course, the titular death worms are the main threat when they try to prove Kratos. And that's where Commander Conrad, Kurt Quango, and Adira Smith bond closely from that experience. And then once they prove the planet, they have some kind of space opera style device that transports matter of the new colonists who are going. They build a basic town, quite often naming it after one of the injured or dead other Expendables, and then they bring in several hundred new colonists to populate that, go back into cryosleep, head back to Earth, get ready to do it all over again, and go prove another planet. After the Rings of Tantalus, we have the War Games of Zelos, and in this book they actually find human inhabitants on the planet, kind of Viking type group, and they have to go through several brutal war games in order to secure their okay to colonize on another part of the planet. And finally, there's the Venom of Argus, number 4. Now, the basic formula of each of these is pretty similar, but there's a nice wrinkle thrown in this one, because not only does Conrad and his crew have to deal with some mysterious rings left by an ancient alien race and some robot monkey ape kind of creatures that are attacking them as soon as they land, but he's also made aware that once he wakes up from cryosleep that there is at least one, possibly more, saboteurs in his crew, the cryogenically frozen other Expendables, the new 4 members of the team. At least one of those is maybe part of some kind of group from back on Earth that wants to discredit the Expend program and is going to do some kind of sabotage. So Conrad and company have to keep a close eye out, not only on the external dangers on the planet, but also coming perhaps from one of their crew members. Very fun. Although I have to say that compared to the first book, The Death Worms of Kratos, which is quite sharply written, this one's a slightly more slapdash, a little bit of repetitive dialogue here and there, but still quite fun and fast, entertaining read. So I recommend this. Now my copy is pretty beat up. You see a huge rip on the back, sadly. Some of the other ones I have are in better shape, but I need to replace this one at some stage. But mostly just a reading copy. And like I said, I've read through this series several times over the years. Now, the third book I read this month was on the Kindle. I just had a Kindle version, and this one was brought to my attention by Ollie at Criminolly, his channel. He talked about this, and this is Blood Standard by Laird, Barron. Pretty interesting cover there. I'll put up a color version on the screen here in a moment, which will give a better indication of what it looks like. Now, this is quite a a fun series. It's a modern, kind of hard, gritty crime novel. It's the first in the Isaiah Coleridge series. I believe Barron's written 3 of these so far, and maybe an additional novella. Now, Barron is perhaps was previously better known as a horror writer, so there's quite a dark tinge to this book. But Isaiah Coleridge is quite an interesting character. He's a big, half Maori, basically enforcer, mob enforcer. And so I think the easiest way to give you a taste of this novel is to read the blurb on the back. So bear with me for a moment. Isaiah Coleridge is a mob enforcer in Alaska. He's tough, seen a lot, and dished out more. But when he forcibly ends the money-making scheme of a made man, he gets in the kind of trouble that can lead to a bullet behind the ear. Saved by the grace of his boss and exiled to upstate New York, Isaiah begins a new life, a quiet life without gunshots or explosions, except a teenage girl disappears, and Isaiah isn't one to let that slip by. And delving into the underworld to track this missing girl will get him exactly the kind of notice he was warned to avoid. So basically, he's really messed up after physically tortured and beaten up and several bones broken. His boss sends him kind of into exile at this farm in upstate New York, run by an African-American couple, and their granddaughter is, he kind of bonds with her slightly. She's a little prickly, but basically he likes her, senses a kind of kindred spirit. As he recuperates and grows stronger on the farm and gets close to the family, the girl goes missing. She's been involved with some low-level thugs that are part of one of criminal gangs in the area, and Isaiah starts to poke around and cause all sorts of trouble. This is a very tough, violent, but very nicely written novel. Sometimes Isaiah Coleridge, he narrates the book in true private eye sort of style, and he's a very interesting and unique character with a dysfunctional family background, and he's seen a lot of tough stuff, and he dishes a lot of it out in this book as well. And sometimes he engages in kind of mental flights of fancy where he views himself as a sort of Homeric warrior barbarian figure, and those passages are quite interesting to read and lend some kind of interesting depth and unique style to this novel. After that, I moved back into some older fiction, and actually some kind of classic fiction. I read for the first time Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Now, Around the World in 80 Days was published, I believe, in, where was it? 1872. And, I know everyone probably who's seen a movie version of this or a TV miniseries version of this book knows the story basically. For whatever reason, I had never read through this whole thing. I've started in the past off and on. Traditionally, I've found Jules Verne's style a little dry. His character's a little flat, a lot of exposition. But I looked around online and found a recommended translation by William Butcher, which was published in 1995, and this is the Oxford World's Classics edition. And, I really got into it this time. I found it really fun. Basically, the main character, Phileas Fogg's very kind of almost robotic, kind of strict timekeeping, very stern, austere sort of fellow. He takes on a challenge, a bet with his fellow members of the Reform Club that he could travel around the world in 80 days. And he sets off with his newly hired valet, Passepartout. Now, Passepartout is a very engaging character. He's probably the most enjoyable character in this book. And Passepartout is a Frenchman who has a circus and acrobat background, which comes in handy in this book in the many adventures they get into. Anyway, he was hoping to find a nice, quiet, retiring English gentleman to work for, but on his very first day, he's whisked off on this around-the-world trip. and they are pursued by a policeman named Fix, who believes that Phileas Fogg absconded with 40,000 pounds from a London bank, which of course he didn't, but that Fix causes all sorts of problems and roadblocks for them along the way. And of course, once they pass through India, there's a romantic element introduced when Passepartout and Fogg rescue an young Indian woman from death as their ritualistic death. They rescue her, and she becomes their traveling companion for the rest of the book. And eventually, the aloof Fogg starts to develop feelings for her. Anyway, very fun. It is a lot of description, a lot of exposition, very detailed, discussing each kind of place and setting that they travel through. But overall, I found it fast-moving for the time that it was written, and quite fun. So I'm glad that I read it finally. And, eventually her feelings start to turn towards romantic as well. And it all comes to a pretty exciting finish at the end. And, there's lots of detail that Verne crams in here for sure, especially for people at the time who hadn't traveled to many of these locations. He fills in all sorts of facts and geographical information. But it's a pretty rollicking adventure. I had a good time with this one. And I'm glad I caught up with that. Okay, next I read The Beasts of Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, this one really was a fast-paced story, and this is kind of follows up from The Return of Tarzan, book number 2. Carries right on from there. Basically, the enemy from that book who is left still alive at the end, a fact which Tarzan really, regrets in this one. Anyway, the Russian Rokov wants to get revenge on his nemesis Tarzan, and also on the woman that spurned him, Jane Clayton, who is now Lord Clayton's wife, Tarzan's wife. And they have a newborn babe named Jack, and Rokov and his cronies basically abduct Jack and lure Tarzan into a trap. And by the second chapter, Tarzan is stranded on a jungle island off the coast of Africa with Rokov calling out to him as the boat leaves, saying, "I got your son. I'm going to take him and turn him over to a tribe of cannibals where he will be raised to become a cannibal himself." And of course, Tarzan ain't going to allow that to happen. So quickly he doffs his civilized veneer. He's had a couple years of getting a little soft and out of his atavistic jungle lord self, but he quickly gets right back into it. So Tarzan is on this island, and he quickly becomes lord of all he surveys and teams up with a group of these giant apes, or man-sized savage apes, befriends them, and also starts to bond with, through various adventures, bond with this leopard cheetah, savage big cat. And to make a long story short, they end up getting off the island and chasing after Rokov and his men, who in the meantime have also got a hold of Jane, and Jane is escaping and trekking through the jungle, having her own adventures and taking care of herself pretty dang well. Now, Rokov also happens to have inadvertently captured Jane, and so Jane is running around in the jungle trying to evade the rape-hungry, evil Rokov, who has designs on her person and try to keep alive. And Tarzan, not aware that Jane is in Africa with him or in the same area as he, but thinking that Rokov has his son, is in full hot pursuit mode. And let's just say when Tarzan catches up with Rokov, I wouldn't want to be on the other side of Tarzan, on the wrong side of him. It's some pretty savage stuff. This is a bloodthirsty and action-packed novel, and it's a lot of fun. And definitely worth reading. It's pretty short. It's one of the shorter Tarzan novels, and it moves right along. not too slow, considering it was written in 1914, 110 plus years ago. It's pretty fast moving and worth a read. So a man named Chuck Welch, who's kind of a Doc Savage expert, runs the Flea Run, the Doc Savage fan group on Facebook. And this year they're doing a Doc Savage book club where a lot of members are reading a book each month from the series. And this month's title was The Annihilist by Kenneth Robeson. Again, Kenneth Robeson is a house name. Lester Dent wrote most of the Doc Savage novels, and he did write this one. There were some other ghost writers who wrote them, and generally speaking, those weren't as good as, by any means, as the Lester Dent ones. Now, one thing you have to be aware of when you are collecting, or if you want to collect these awesome Bantam paperback editions of the Doc Savage series, the numbering is not something you can take seriously. This is number, according to the cover, number 31, but actually the Annihilist is the 22nd novel from the Doc Savage Pulp magazine, published in December 1934. And this one also extremely violent by Doc Savage standards, and that's saying something because quite often they can be quite violent. Usually there's some mysterious menace that Doc Savage, Clark Savage Jr., to give him his full name, and his 5 aides, depending on how many are actually in the book at the time. In this book, there's only 3 of the 5 that assist Doc, along with his beautiful cousin, Patricia Savage, who is a very fan favorite character, who appears in a little over 40 of the 181 original Doc Savage pulp novels. Bantam did end up publishing all 181. The last novels in the later years run of the pulp were quite a bit shorter on word count, and so the last several, I'd say last 13 Bantam editions are omnibus editions containing 4 to 5 short novels in each one. But these earlier ones are longer, probably roughly 40 to 50,000 words in length, and the earlier ones tend to be the best, with the Doc Savage near superhuman exploits, a man trained from birth in many different skills. He's a polymath to end all polymaths. Very fun character. This one's got a really excellent kind of atmosphere, kind of early winter, very cold New York streets. And the menace this time is the pop-eyed death. Now, not Popeye, as in Popeye the Sailor Man, but pop-eyed. So I wouldn't hesitate to use the word evil genius, because quite often Doc is going up against evil bad guys, but there's a little bit of a question about how evil the Annihilist is, because the victims in this case are not innocent people, but criminals and killers. And anyone who tries to kill or has killed just previously with criminal tendencies dies hideously from the pop-eye death. Basically, some radio wave is making a gland in the brain do something that pushes the eyes practically at falling out of their sockets. Very gruesome. And they die screaming and writhing in agony. And basically, criminals are dropping like flies all through New York City. Doc Savage is being blamed for this, so he's trying to get to the bottom of it. And it has some connection to his crime college, his secret place in upstate New York, where Doc Savage sends some of the few criminals. Not too many usually survive to the end of these novels, but the ones that do, that he's captured, he'll send to this place in upstate New York where through surgery, the writer supposes that there's some kind of gland, that criminal gland. Again, this is 1934, folks. Some kind of criminal gland that can be removed from the brain and turn these former criminals into upright citizens, and they're matriculated back into society as contributing civilians, no longer wanting to commit crimes. So a whole host of different factions of criminal gangs are trying to find out, where the location of this crime college is for nefarious purposes, and Doc has to stop them. Lots of action, lots of banter between Monk and Ham, 2 of Doc's aides. They're usually always fighting and scrapping despite having each other's back in a crisis, dock up to all sorts of, amazing feats of strength and daring do. Good time for sure if you like this kind of thing. Continuing in the pulp vein, I read the first of these popular library collections of the Jules de Grandin series. This is the Adventures of Jules de Grandin, with an introduction by Lynn Carter and an afterword by Robert Weinberg, filling in lots of interesting detail on the writing and popularity of these stories. Now, this is by Seabury Quinn. Seabury Quinn was an extremely popular writer throughout the life of Weird Tales. In fact, his stories were frequently ranked higher by readers than those by H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, and others. Now, his stories maybe haven't survived or haven't dated quite as well as some of those other illustrious writers, but they're still a lot of fun. And this collects the first 7 stories that were written between 1925, or were published in Weird Tales between 1925 and 1927. Now, who is Jules de Grandin? Jules de Grandin, I want you to imagine, if you're familiar with Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie's famous Belgian detective, and he had his stalwart but rather dim bulb assistant Hastings, Captain Hastings. Well, imagine that, but in an occult detective vein, and with a much more badass character. Now, I don't think this is art included maybe from the pulps in this paperback. This is Jules de Grandin, and this is his friend, Dr. Trowbridge. I don't think that's an accurate depiction of de Grandin as he's described. He's described as slight and wiry, with flashing blue eyes and a little pencil mustache and blonde hair. But he is a badass and super duper monster killer extraordinaire, and he's a lot of fun. Like Poirot, his dialogue is sprinkled with all sorts of French expressions and malapropisms of English, and but otherwise he doesn't bear much similarity to Poirot, other than he has his own very strong gray cells. And frequently he and Trowbridge go up against all sorts of monsters and beasties and demons and vampires and werewolves and all sorts of things, but not all the time. One of the stories in here is just a straight up kind of spicy fantasy or spicy adventure story where de Grandin and Trowbridge are on a steamer ship in the South Pacific, and it is deliberately wrecked on some shoals, and they're stranded on this island that is full of a tribe of cannibals who were ruled over by a kind of fallout from the British aristocracy, who is mad at all, Caucasians, and is getting his revenge on them, happily feeding them to his pet octopus. Anyway, that's quite a wild adventure story. Again, de Grandin serves the bad guy up pretty properly on his own. There's another story about, as kind of pictured here on the cover, a mad scientist who creates a half-man, half-ape hybrid, and at the full moon it's going around tearing apart people. De Grandin has to dispatch him with several shots from his revolver. And there's also a vampire that he deals with, a spirit of an evil, lecherous aristocrat that is inhabiting a giant snake, part of a curse in France. And there's a werewolf story in here, and a disembodied hand that goes around and attacks people. A whole bunch of fun stories. Again, not great literature, but, and probably a little long in the telling, but full of all sorts of interesting elements and, good old-fashioned pulp, supernatural, occult, detective hijinks. So there were several of these popular library editions put out. I think there were 6. I have 3 of them, and they each contain 6 to 7 stories. One of them is a novel, a full-length novel. 92 short stories and 1 novel were published in Weird Tales by Jules de Grandin, and they pretty much spanned the whole length of the magazine's run. And I know there's a better version out there. There's I think Nightshade Press put out a complete 5-volume set of all the stories. Love to get my hands on those, but for now, I'm happy to have these paperback editions. Finally, I closed out the month with a Western, Louis L'Amour's Heller with a Gun. This nice 1984 Bantam edition. But the book was first published in 1955, and it's a good one. It's really an interesting story. Basically, the lead here, the Heller of the title, is a man named King Mabry. Again, he's had kind of a hard upbringing. He's fast with the gun. He's killed some men, but always, as he says, they were facing him and armed. Anyway, he's making his way through the very harsh winter terrain in Wyoming, the Wyoming Territory. And of course, you know, a lot of these these Bantam editions have a map in the front. I love a good map, whether it's a fantasy map, fantasy world map, or a real world map like this one. Anyway, Mabry comes across a troupe of actors led by Tom Healy, an Irishman. He's got an older man with him, another actor, and 3 women. One of them is older, and 2 of the others are young, and of course, very good looking, as is the case most of the time with a Western novel by Louis L'Amour. And basically, Tom Healy is hired on a guide, a man named Barker, who Mabry distrusts right away. Barker's gonna, and a couple of other guys are gonna lead this troop through the mountain pass to get to a town several 100 miles away to start their first tour and start making some money, make their fortune, or try to. But of course, Barker's up to no good. He knows that Healy has $15,000 in gold stashed somewhere in the wagon. He's found this out without any help from Healy, and he's got a pretty wicked past. Mabry doesn't know that for sure, but King Mabry knows men well, and he senses something's wrong there. He doesn't like the idea of these women being molested or killed out in the wild, so he decides to ride after them and try to help. And what follows is a tale full of harsh winter survival and lots and lots of action, not only gun battles with the main bad guys, but also with thrilling attacks by some renegade Sioux Indians, as well as some other friendly Indians that they trade with. Lots of action, lots of really terse but evocative prose from Mr. L'Amour that really expresses you get a real sense of the cold and the harsh winter and what it takes to survive there. And there's kind of an interesting love quadrangle which develops between 2 of the women and Tom Healy, the Irishman who's leading the troop, and of course King Mabry himself. So I really recommend this one. It's one of the earlier, perhaps, L'Amour novels. I'm not so sure of the cover. I don't think that really gives a good impression of Mabry from as far as his face or whatever, from how he's described in the book. But it's a pretty cool cover nonetheless, and a pretty cool book. If you like Westerns, I recommend you give this a try. All right, well, I've went on long enough here, so I'll leave it there. I had a pretty good reading month. I start back up at work starting next week, and so I'm not sure how my reading is going to go in April, but I'll try to at least get as many books as I can read to talk about on this channel then. All right, till then, thanks for tuning in. Take care, enjoy what you're reading, and we'll see you again.